What is up, Chargers fans? Steven just recently did an interview with Jeff Duncan of The Athletic, who covers the New Orleans Saints. And, rather than just have that interview on the channel, after listening to it, I wanted to talk about that interview. I wanted to take what was discussed in that interview and, talk about it a little bit more, at least in terms of the Chargers, because this was kind of more so about Peyton and Breeze and the Saints, but I also want to apply that to the Chargers as well. And there were a number of things that you could take from it, but A, definitely I recommend watching that interview, and B, if you can get the book, go for it, because I think there's a lot to learn. And there's something about interviews like this that I kind of prefer to either player interviews or coach interviews, because there's only so much those players or coaches can tell you. And whereas, guys like this, like Jeff Duncan, can tell you a little bit more because they're not as tied to keeping the team's secrets, if you will. He'll be cordial about the whole thing, and he's certainly not going to bash any of the Saints, and he doesn't in this interview. But he can let on a little bit more than what other players or coaches can let on, and I love that because there's only so much we know as fans. So being able to learn more and be students of football and the NFL in general, I think is pretty cool. So definitely check it out. But let's get started with some of the things that I pulled from that interview that I thought were really interesting. And the first thing is that the Saints, according to Jeff Duncan and the stats that I'll show you right now, they took a while to get established. It says he specifically referenced that it took him about 2 years for Sean Payton and Drew Brees to finally find their groove as an offense. Now that meant, figuring out what schemes that worked for them, what concepts worked for them, what players fit those schemes and concepts, what Drew Brees was comfortable running, what Sean Payton was comfortable calling, and so on. And so if you look here, and I'm sorry, my graphics are not as good as Arjun's. That's not what I'm here for. I'm just here to relay some information. So in 2005, prior to Brees and Payton joining, their offensive points per game were 14.7 points per game. That did jump to 25.2 in 2006 when they joined the team. And from there, you can see that they started to, based on their draft, build the offense to their liking. So, of course, Drew Brees joins. They draft Reggie Bush in the first round. That draft is really good, by the way. Check it out. They drafted a tackle and a guard I think on day 3. Both of them had really good careers, and I think they're either still in the league or they just went out of the league. And that was in 2006 when they were drafted. So that tells you what kind of career they had. And then, of course, they drafted Marcus Colston, one of the best, if not the best receiver in Saints history in the 7th round. And so they really started to get better as an offense there. And then a small dip again in 2007 to 23.7. Again, that's still much better than 2005, but not quite where they wanted to be yet. But they did draft Robert Meacham in the first round. We'll talk about him in a bit. And then you start to see that this offense gets better and better and better. And, there's a number of ways I could have looked at it, whether it's Drew Brees stats or receiving stats or wins or whatever. But I think points per game pretty much sums it up on offense, going from, where they started, 14.7 the year prior to eventually hitting 28.9, basically double that, to 32.5 in 2009, which is more than double that 2005 number. But it's worth noting it did take them some time. So what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is we need to be patient about this Chargers team. I do think that they are more talented immediately than the Saints were in 2006. I don't know how productive Marcus Colston was, but he was a 7th round pick. And I don't know if he was productive immediately. Reggie Bush, yes, because he was a 1st round pick. But it did take them some time. Whereas Herbert's kind of more established, but we'll see. This whole coaching staff is new. Some of the receivers are new. Some of the running backs are new. The offensive line is completely new. The philosophy in general is going to be new. So I think we need to be patient when it comes to the Chargers. And I'm kind of glad that Jeff Duncan brought this up, because we expect, and I think someone asked in a most recent Twitter Q&A, should the Chargers be patient? How patient can fans be? And the answer is, if you look at this, they took the Saints. Granted, they did get better. And I think the Chargers should get better in terms of points per game. But, give them some time. Give them at least, 2 years of figuring things out, at least 1 year of figuring things out and trying to build the offense in the image that they want before we start calling for anybody's jobs. But that is definitely something very interesting and something that I thought that was worth noting. Of course, the other part, and I mentioned Robert Meacham earlier, and so I'll tie into some things in a second, is that the Chargers kind of botched the Robert Meacham signing by asking him, apparently, and then Jeff Duncan said Joe Lombardi told him this, I believe. The Chargers asked Robert Meacham to be a number 1 receiver, which Meacham wasn't exactly capable of doing at that point in his career, even though he was drafted as a first round pick. He just never was going to get there. I guess in the same way that maybe Mike Williams would be, or is trying to be, that is. And I guess the Chargers asked Meacham to run certain routes that he just was not comfortable with. And, it just didn't work. Obviously, it didn't work. He had 207 yards, which is one of the lowest totals of his career. And, it just didn't work out. Not that he was all that great in New Orleans, but he was certainly more productive, before he went to the Chargers. 722 yards, 638 yards, 620 yards, signs that contract and puts up 207 yards for the Chargers. And I'm pretty sure most of those 207 yards came against the one game against the Saints, that one revenge game. And that was about it. And it's clearly not because they didn't have a quarterback, right? Philip Rivers was still chucking and maybe wasn't as efficient in 2012, but still, it's Philip Rivers. Come on. He's putting up 4,000 yards in his sleep. So for him to only have 207 yards, obviously there was something wrong. Granted, I didn't go back and watch the film on this. I'm just going to take, Jeff Duncan and Joe Lombardi's word for it. And when they say that, the Chargers didn't use him correctly because they were asking him to run more routes than he was honestly comfortable running. Sorry, there's my dog and she's about to get my foot. So I'm going to pick her up and I guess you'll have to see her. This is Galadriel. She's going to cameo for this episode, apparently. She's very, very rambunctious and 9 weeks old. Anyway, so I'll continue with the episode. So that leads me to Mike Williams and that very interesting quote from Joe Lombardi that was taken one of two ways. And I think it was originally taken this first way, and that's kind of how I heard it. But reading it a little bit more, it seems like the other way is how we should be taking this. So the way I initially took it was that, he basically said that Mike Williams, when you put Mike Williams and Mike Thomas in the same sentence, and he basically did, and called them both the ex-receiver, it sounds like Lombardi is going to give Mike Williams that Mike Thomas kind of role, which again had all of us confused because if anyone's getting a Mike Thomas kind of role, it's Keenan Allen, who's clearly more like Mike Thomas and obviously just as productive, or generally just as productive and as reliable. Whereas Mike Williams is not that guy, right? So, the quote, which was, as much as this offense will resemble New Orleans, he plays the X, and the ball has always kind of found the X receiver in this offense. I think there will be some natural production that comes his way because of the nature of the offense. And so I think I need to step back a little bit, but talk about, that Mike Williams, it's more that the ball is just he's going to be targeted more in the same way, I guess, that Mike Thomas was, not in the same routes, but I think they're just going to try to feature that X receiver more in this offense. The reason I'm now definitely departing from the initial thought, which is that, Mike Williams and Mike Thomas are the same and they're going to run, and Mike Williams is going to run Mike Thomas routes. The reason I'm going to depart from that is because of what Lombardi said with Robert Meacham, right? Because the Saints, and I think this is really cool, the Saints would film their receivers. They'd bring in new receivers, rookie draft picks, signings, whatever, and they'd run routes, every single route over and over again on film. And the Saints would look at those receivers, and the offensive staff would look at the receivers and say, okay, we're great at doing this. We're not as great at doing that. No, we're not going to throw out that part of the offense, but we're much better at doing this. So we're going to put our receivers and our concepts, and we're going to build a multiple variable offense, but around the things that we do really, really well. And so, I think that the Chargers would learn from the mistake, and I don't think that they would, repeat that same mistake with Robert Meacham. And I certainly don't think, Joe Lombardi or Staley would make this mistake. But it's good to know that if this is carried over, they won't make Mike Williams a Mike Thomas-like receiver. They may just target him more, but on things that Mike Williams is comfortable with. Now, what are we going to see from Mike Williams? I'm not quite sure. That's one of the questions that I need answered because, is there more to him than that we know? We've only seen him in the Lynn era, and perhaps there's more to Mike Williams than we actually knew because he was being limited. I don't necessarily buy that, but if anyone's going to get the most out of him, I do think it's Staley, Lombardi, and of course, whatever they can do with Herbert. So we'll see. But, I think Williams will still be asked to do more, and they'll build around what he can do well. Recently, I just talked about the mesh concept with the Packers run. I think Mike Williams could benefit from that. Maybe we'll see more of that. Maybe those shallow crossers, deep crossers, whatever. We're not going to see him do a bunch of, looky routes, if you will, looky choice routes. So who knows? And of course, that does bring me to my final point and what Jeff Duncan said. He's going to and by he I mean Lombardi and Staley, they're going to look at Herbert and say, okay, we're in year one here with us. You're in year two, even though you haven't even had 16 games yet. What are you comfortable doing? What are you really good at? Let's look at what you're the best at. What are you comfortable doing? Okay, great. That's what you're good at. That's what you're comfortable with. Fantastic. We are going to make a multiple variable, strong, high powered offense around what you do really well right now. And in the future, look, I come from the Saints. This is what Lombardi would say. I come from the Saints. We have a massive playbook, one of the biggest playbooks in the NFL, which is nearly impossible to cover. But, we're going to get there eventually. For right now, we're going to build our offense around what you do best. What is it that Herbert does best? He does a lot of things very well. But we'll see. Does Herbert really comfortable with play actions and keepers and bootlegs or whatever? Does he love running it on QB sneak on first down? I don't know. But whatever they're going to do, they're going to make sure that Herbert is comfortable doing it, which I think is also really, really comforting for fans because, it seems very silly, but you want to maximize the talent of your talent and do what they do best. You don't want to sit there and force them to be something that they're not. And I wouldn't say that was the problem with the team last season. I don't think they were forcing Herbert to be something he wasn't. I just think they didn't let him be what he was or could be. And I think the best we saw of Herbert was just kind of him being himself, not the offense being tailored to him so he can be the best version of himself. Whereas I think in this, with this scheme, this roster, I think he's going to be able to do that. So again, a lot of things to pull from this interview. I really enjoyed listening to it. So please go listen to it if you can. I just wanted to react to it because I think there's so much you can take and apply to this current Chargers season. So just to recap, obviously great interview. Give the Chargers some time as they build their offense. It's going to take some time, and that's okay. We expect that. But look at what the best maybe of all time did. It still took them 2 years to really reach that elite level, number one in the NFL, best offense, game-changing, innovative offense. It still took them 2 years to really reach that level. And if it takes them 2 years, maybe we can be patient as well, right? Obviously, we need to learn from the Meacham experiment and not let the receivers falter because we're asking them to do things that they are not comfortable doing, right? And by doing that, we're going to make Herbert comfortable. We're going to make the receivers comfortable, the offense very comfortable, and we're going to be the best that we can because we're all going to be put in the best positions to succeed. And that's kind of refreshing. It seems like a no-duh thing, but sometimes I wonder if the coaching staff knew that last season. All right, that's it from me. Let me know what you guys thought of the interview or what you took from this, my recap of the interview. Take care, guys.